growing up in Greenwich, drugs and alcohol were the cool thing to do. Opiates and pills and things like benzodiazepines and smoking a lot of weed and drinking. It's like the light went on. It's like, wow, I can kind of fly under the radar here, can fit in really well.
Mm,
The feelings that I had growing up, I always felt like I could be in a room full of people and I always felt alone. I always was a introvert extrovert where
yeah.
could be very social, but it was all very surface level. I always felt like I needed something to soothe what was going on inside me. And so drugs and alcohol really provided that for me. In high school it was the cool thing to do, and I slipped into, smoking weed and drinking every day, every weekend. And it really just progressed from there.
Welcome to the CoachMD podcast. I'm Dr. Charles Glassman, bringing you 3 decades of experience as a physician and a coach. Join us as we navigate the maze of medical advice with real-life stories, empowering you to take charge of your health. In our That Happens segment, guests share transformative experiences, reminding us that we're all human and not just patients. So get ready for a journey into healthcare reimagined, where empowerment and discovery pave the way. Thanks for coming on, Eric. I really appreciate you taking the time and to spend with us and my audience and sharing what you have to say. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah,
I'm thrilled to be on here. It's going to be
yeah,
fun.
yeah. So I'm going to ask you first. I'm going to let everybody know that where Eric is coming from is a place where he overcame something that was very difficult to overcome, and people struggle with all sorts of addictions, um, and whether it be alcohol, drugs, but it doesn't have to be substances. It could be lifestyles. It could be certain things that people are addicted to, whether it be food, whether it be pornography. We all turn to addictions for different reasons, and they become habits. And I like to, as my listeners know, the books that I wrote, Brain Drain, Fake News Stories by Your Brain, I'd like to delve in to the dynamics of our primitive nature, our what I call the automatic brain, which flips into autopilot and causes us to fight or flee dangers, threats, or vulnerabilities. And a lot of times that fight or flight is shown in ways that are not typical. We think fight or flight may be fighting a predator or running from somebody who's attacking us, or getting into an argument or something. But a lot of times the fight or flight shows itself in our behaviors and our addictive behaviors. And so what I'm going to ask you, Eric, if you could just kind of bring us back, okay, bring us back way back, okay, bring us back to what it was like for you as a child. What was your family like, and kind of lead us through how you might have developed turning to substances that might have helped you either fight or flee danger, or calmed anxieties or whatever. But if you could kind of bring us way back to Eric as a child, what was that like?
Yeah, of course. So I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut. I grew up in a pretty normal family, 2 sisters, a mom and a dad. Both parents very supportive of me, and, just a loving family. When I was 9, my parents got divorced. And, I try not to attribute anything, a lot of external factors
Sure.
attributed to why I developed a substance use addiction and, addiction in general. But I take a lot of ownership for my own addiction and
Sure.
things I could have done differently. But so when my parents got divorced at the age of 9, it really rocked my world.
Yeah.
It really crumbled that sense of security and safety that I had within
Mhm.
this family unit. Um, it's everything that I have ever known. It felt like it was a lie. It felt like,
Yeah.
my mom and dad had lied to me, and
Wow.
they're not really there for me. And this family is breaking. After my parents got divorced, um, my world opened up. My mom started dating another man,
Mhm.
which was in itself really strange. My dad started dating, and that safe space that I had within my family was really gone.
Mhm.
And as I grew up and got older, I really, coming into middle school and high school, I really didn't feel like I had the safety and security at home anymore. And so I started staying out later. I started hanging out with my friends more.
Mm,
And it really, I sought out external forces, external ways to bring this safety and security and this comfort. You know, my mom's boyfriend that she started dating, the family was very different than what I knew growing up. They smoked weed as a family together. They were big into
mm,
partying. There was alcohol around. There was, weed around. It was a very different scenario than when my life was, whole.
yeah.
Um, and so I started to, seek out these external ways of feeling comfort, feeling, safety. And, drugs and alcohol were one way to do that. They provided immediate release, an immediate instant
Yeah.
gratification of that
Yep.
comfort. Um, as I entered, high school, growing up in Greenwich, drugs and alcohol were the cool thing to do.
Hmm.
A lot of people were into opiates and pills and things like benzodiazepines and smoking a lot of weed and drinking. And it just, it's like the light went on. It's like, wow, I can kind of fly under the radar here. I can get these drugs and alcohol. I can fit in really well.
Mm,
And it's something that I can just slide right into. The feelings that I had growing up, I always felt like I could be in a room full of people and I always felt alone, you know? I always was an introvert extrovert where
yeah.
could be very social, but it was all very surface level. I always felt like I needed something to soothe what was going on inside me. And so drugs and alcohol really provided that for me.
Yeah.
Um, in high school it was the cool thing to do, and I slipped into, smoking weed and drinking every day, every weekend. And it really just progressed from there. I started to, do more things than smoke weed and do benzodiazepines and, do Xanax. And then I kind of found opiates. And opiates were like the final straw. They were
Mm,
like the one blanket that somebody wrapped around me and said everything's going to be fine.
yeah.
Um,
And this was
and
about
I,
around the time like Oxy was the Oxycontin, the whole thing with Purdue Pharmaceutical, and they were,
exactly.
yeah, that was the safe Oxy or whatever. But that was, yeah. So go ahead. So
Exactly.
yeah.
This was around, I was in high school from 2007 to 2011.
Yep.
So this was right around that big Oxy boom. So
Yep.
Oxys were the cool thing to do. Greenwich being a very affluent community, there were a lot of, families and kids that had a lot of money. They'd
Hmm.
buy a lot of drugs, they'd throw big parties. It was what everybody wanted to do. And I really wanted to fit in, you
Yeah.
know? I felt like I didn't have a place at home. I felt like being out with my friends and drugs and alcohol were the place to be, and I really wanted to fit in.
Yeah.
So I started doing these oxys and these pills, and like I said, the light went on. It's like, wow, this is what I've been missing. This is what I needed, and I just chased that, and
Mm,
I chased that for about. So my last drink or drug was on May 19th, 2015.
okay.
I'd say my first opiate experience was when I was a junior in high school. So it was
Wow.
around 2010. Um, and then, my opiate use progressed from, snorting, oxys and pills to then, using a needle and, shooting it intravenously. Um, and I think the first time I did that was right when I probably right when I graduated high school. So there was about a 4 or 5 year run there of me doing opiates pretty heavily.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So what I'd like to kind of dissect a little bit, because now Eric is, he'll talk about that later on about what he's doing now. Um, but there's when I talk about, we have our primitive nature, our animal nature, what is the only purpose is to help protect us from danger, threat, or vulnerability. And then we have a higher consciousness, whether, I call it a divine nature, my connection with a higher power, God that I believe in. But, other people come to that higher consciousness in a different way. But what I what my experience as a doctor, and Eric, you can talk to this. What I noticed that when people are doing things that they know they shouldn't be doing or they know are bad for them, but they still do it anyway. But drugs, of course, they make you feel good, the short-term gain. When I say short-term gain, but long-term pain, whereas a lot of time the short-term pain leads to long-term gain. So that's just a different way of looking at it. But certainly the short-term gain of the substances, that's kind of how our fight or flight in a way is showing itself. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but anyone that you've noticed and yourself, when you are going and doing that behavior, taking those drugs, you're to me, it means that there is some type of danger, threat, or vulnerability that you're running from, that you're escaping, and you're using this to numb it. And you touched
Sure.
upon it a little bit as far as the dysfunction in the family and how you were felt to be an introvert, kind of an extroverted introvert. But kind of talk to how you were able to use the drugs, and kind of what made you turn to them. Maybe if you can go into that a little bit more, and also your experience with people who you counsel today.
Sure. So, the two of the biggest factors that kind of led me into the drugs and alcohol path was that it was a way to blend in. And I felt like I had trouble blending in from a very young age. So it was
Mm,
a way to blend. It provided me the comfort of, you know, the social anxiety, which was huge for me.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and it gave me that instant gratification of feeling like everything is all right. Um, and since that rift when my parents got divorced when I was young, I felt like nothing was all right. And
Mm,
so that kind of translated throughout my life in different ways. Nothing was all right for me at home. Nothing was all right for me moving forward. And so it just gave me that instant gratification that everything's going to be fine. And it was a very short-term feeling of everything is fine.
yes.
Um, and with substances like opiates and benzodiazepines, there is that physical component as well. So
Yes.
while you're chasing this instant gratification of feeling okay and everything's all right, and you can blend in and the social anxiety goes away, you're also developing that physical dependency.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so that really came into play. And once you develop the physical dependency, your mind is almost conditioned to say, well, I feel like one, I need this substance, or else I'm going to get, I'm going to go through withdrawals, or I'm going to get sick. And then two, um, you just kind of kick the can down the road. You procrastinate doing anything other than that substance and
Yeah.
anything other than what feels good and what is going to solve your problem immediately.
Yeah. And so the euphoria that one gets when they take a substance, even alcohol. So alcohol, a drink or two will give you that kind of upper, kind of that euphoric feeling where you feel top of the world, you could do anything. But then you go three or four, it becomes a depressant, which a lot of people will experience, but they're always and looking for that kind of euphoria. And the more you drink, for instance, the more you need to get the euphoria, and the more down the road the depressant part of it kicks in, and it's a mess. But the thing is with trying to numb or trying to get that comfort, that safety net of that feeling, that physical feeling, it's because that this fight or flight that I talk about, this automatic brain, if you will, when danger, threat, or vulnerability kicks in, we know that feeling. It's a terrible feeling. When that social anxiety comes in, the physical, it's so convincing to us that we're less than something. It's like if you see a cop in a police officer in your rear view mirror. I mean, the first thing that happens is your heart is pounding out of your chest. Well,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be a police officer. In our 21st century brain, it can be just circumstances in our life that set it off. So that physical feeling is so uncomfortable that, and especially if you don't have the support network, if you don't have a really a core support network, and so many people feel this way. And now with social media, a lot of people will look and feel more anxious because they feel like they can't keep up with people's highlight reels. Everything is so great. So we see this unfortunately getting more and more. But so it seems like we can kind of figure out, and you figured out kind of what led you down this path. And what people have to realize is that once you go down that path, as Eric was talking about, your body becomes physiologically dependent, so your receptors on your body need it. And so not only are you trying to calm this social anxiety or this insecurity or whatever type of danger or vulnerability you feel that you're fighting and fleeing, but now you have something else. Now you have the danger of not getting it. So now your brain has put you into this vicious cycle where you fed it, and now it's saying, well, if I don't get it, it's dangerous. So tell us a little bit about, did you ever try to stop? And well, I know you did eventually stop, but I mean, when you were in the throes of it, was there ever a time that you felt like it just was too painful, and then you just wanted to stop, but it was too painful to stop? Was there ever, before you actually became sober, was there, what was it like before that, like a year or two before that?
Those are great questions. I want to touch on one thing that you
Yeah,
said. So
yeah.
when I was young, and I know this now, I had undiagnosed anxiety, I had undiagnosed ADHD, and I never thought to say to my parents or anyone, hey, I need help, or hey, I should speak to a therapist. I didn't have those skills at the time.
Hmm.
So there was a lack of reaching out for help. And instead of reaching out for help from, people in my family or my parents to say, hey, I'm really struggling with this. I need some assistance. I kind of dove further into the drugs and alcohol because that was it fed the ADHD where it was instant gratification. It gave me that calmness, that solace.
Yep.
Um, and it solved all my problems immediately.
Mm.
And so I just always think that's good to mention because a lot of young kids, especially after divorce, they're since the rift or that rift happens, it's really hard to reach out and ask for help. I always had this mindset that I can do this on my own. I'm figuring this out as I go. This is just kind of how it happens. So I always like to mention that.
Yeah, it's
However,
important.
back to your question. So, I attempted to get sober two other times before my final, sobriety date in 2015. I went to the same treatment center in 2013, May,
Hmm.
2014 in June, and then in 2015 in May.
Mm.
Um, and so I would my life would fall apart, I would go to treatment. I would put together about 3 or 4 months. And then, I would go back to drugs and alcohol. And that happened twice before, in 2013 and 2014. My parents and my family, did an intervention on me in 2012. It was
Mm.
unsuccessful. I went back out and I used for another year. And then in 2013, was the first time I went back to my mom's house and I said, hey, I need help. It was the first time that I had asked for help. Um, and she said, okay, great. Let's get you into treatment. I went to treatment. I
What
learned all
was, let
the
me
edu-
just interrupt for one
Yeah.
second. How did you know you needed help? Like what was happening in your
So I
life?
had this, I always had this inner sense where I knew what I was doing was wrong, and wrong in the sense that I knew it was against who I was, but
Yeah.
I also knew it was wrong for me. And so, an intervention happened for me in 2012. Like I said, it was unsuccessful. And then that next year, I probably used drugs and alcohol harder than I ever used before,
Mm.
because of the anger. I was so angry that my family could,
Yeah.
do something like an intervention on me. And then, I come to the end of the year. I hadn't spoken to my mom or my two sisters, maybe, I think I spoke to them maybe twice in that year. And I came back to her house and I said, you know what, you're right. I have a problem with drugs and alcohol and I need help. And I don't, you ask what made you ask for help? I don't know what it was,
Yeah.
it was a little bit of desperation. It was, the willingness to change everything about my life to get out of this endless cycle. Um, and so I reached out and I got help. I went to treatment. The
Yeah.
funny thing is, when you get sober, you go through this almost pink cloud phase where everything is great. You're about 30 days off drugs and alcohol. You're feeling good. You're looking good. The natural euphoria from your life is there. Then it starts to dwindle and it starts to go away, and the work begins. And if you don't follow up with more therapy and more, support for your addiction, it's like your addiction is doing push-ups in the background.
Mm,
So your first, weak point or your first slip, that addiction is going to come right back in, full speed ahead.
yeah.
I never did the work. I didn't want to do the work. I didn't want to see a therapist. I didn't want to do the inward, I didn't want to look inward. Um, and so naturally, I got tired of being sober. I forgot what it was like, how bad it was. I forgot that gift of desperation, or maybe
Mm,
it wasn't a real gift of desperation. Um, and, I ended up using again. And that happened once more in 2014. And, what happened in 2015 for me was that I was tired of being on this endless cycle. I had been in treatment, twice before. I felt like the treatment center knew more about me than I knew about me.
hmm
I felt like they knew more about me than my family did.
mm,
And so that was a scary fact to me. Um, I ended up developing hepatitis C,
wow.
from sharing
Yeah.
dirty needles,
Yep.
which was a huge health concern that I had. I had no family support whatsoever. I was, 22, turning 23, and I had nothing really to show for it. And it weighed heavy on me.
Yeah.
And I was willing to do whatever it took to change. I wanted a life. And, my mom had always said, you can come to me when you need help, but other than that, I can't be a part of your life
Mm,
if you're going to be using drugs and alcohol and you're going to be, on that merry-go-round. And so, I knew I could go to my mom and ask for help, and I knew she would help me. I knew I could go to my parents and they would get me into treatment. They would help me. And so I said, you know what? I'm willing to do whatever it takes to change everything about my life because I never want to live like this. I am mentally and physically exhausted. Um, I had the health concern. I had nothing to show for my life at 23. I didn't complete college. I had no friends left in my life. I had no family left in my life.
mm,
And I knew with the way I was going, I was probably going to die or I was going to end up in jail.
yeah. Wow.
Um, so I
Okay.
took that gift and I never looked back.
Wow. Yeah, and you know the date, and that's very important because if you, and I'm sure you know this, if you talk to somebody and they can't give you that date, you know that they're not really serious about it, or they may not be serious about it.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
Going way back, and you had said before, as far as your, family, and you take accountability, and certainly, um, look, I'm a parent of four adult children, so I know it's very difficult being a parent, and it's very difficult, um, parenting, and certainly, I'm sure your parents felt terrible and do feel terrible about what happened, and do take some blame. But what happens is our brains are developing between birth and adolescence. Probably 90 to 95% of our brain has developed during that period of time. So we're making all sorts of connections in our brain, whether they're true or false, and that's to give us information that we take into adulthood or to our teenage years, and are what's used for that primitive brain of ours to know what's dangerous or what's threatening to us. And again, a lot of those connections are not valid, but we're still making them. because it's basically a child's brain that's putting that together. So the culture of a household, it's very hard to identify every single day of your childhood, but we get a kind of an overall gestalt of our of the things that are going on in a household, and certainly in a family that is separated by divorce. When you were 9 years old, certainly between your birth and 9 years old, even though things were calm, I'm sure that there was certain things that your child brain was picking up that wasn't really making, associations. And somehow, and we'll never know really how that happened, it probably contributed to that profound sense of loss when it happened. So I kind of want to do this, and tell me if you don't want to go back to that. But what, yeah, you said how you felt when it happened, when you found out that they were getting divorced. But can you recall the actual when that happened? Like what was said to you, and your feelings at the time? And because the way I look at it, and you've also identified it, and I'm saying this for our audience because it's important to, you mentioned the therapy and doing the work, getting back sometimes to these pivotal moments, which are the what I call the danger triggers, the main danger triggers that are this primitive brain of ours kind of holds on to make us fight or flight in ways that we really don't want to do it. So can you take us back to that moment or those days when that was happening?
Of course. So
Yeah,
I think, and this will be a rough estimate of the memory, but I'll do
yeah.
my best. I believe it was around December. It was in the month of, holiday season. And I remember, everything was normal. It was holiday season, so we were excited. My father's Jewish, my mom is Roman Catholic, so we celebrated both, the holidays, Jewish and Christian holidays. And it was a good time of year, to say the least. And I remember they called us into the living room, and, it was like a bomb had been dropped on us. I don't remember exactly what was said, but I remember it was the crumbling of my entire existence.
Mm,
I had never
wow.
heard anything like that in my entire life. Um, and it's your primary support system, giving you this information. So it's like, how can you trust after that? That's what it felt like for me, at least.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody else's experience, but it felt like a major breach of trust had been broken. And I think that really set the tone for the rest of my life, where I have, major trust issues and major, um, anxiety that in any relationship, romantic or friendship or anything, work relationship, that there can always be a major breach of trust at any
Mm,
moment.
yeah.
Um, I remember that, and I think I remember correctly, my dad took me to a movie, and my mom sat with my two sisters after it had happened. And my dad was crying, my mom was crying, and it was just a huge implosion of that family unit that we were there.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
um, as I talked about, the birth and adolescence. So you were right smack in that brain development area.
Yes.
And so our brain accumulates data. That's what it's doing. It's accumulating data from when we're born to adolescence. And that data is to be used as a reference point. So to alert us if there's danger. So the biggest triggers are, I describe it as the big three, are the one up trigger. So uh, when we're children, we learn what is going to be somebody, person, place, or thing that could be threatening to us, whether it's someone who's bigger than us, whether it's someone who's richer than us, whether it's someone who's better looking than us. So that's the one up danger. We get all that data during childhood to reference that as adults. Then there's the comfort zone, the security, danger, or the thing that are the data that is being assembled as we're children. What is going to be outside of our comfort zone that might be dangerous? What do we feel is familiar? So many times, if there's let's say a lot of arguing in a relationship, that someone grows up in a family that doesn't drop the bomb, but it's continuous. Okay, they might think that that's normal, and as they get older, if they're in a normal relationship where there's no arguing, they'll fight and flee that, because the comfort, what they're familiar with, as again, this is the child's brain, they fight and flee back to that comfort. So they seek out somebody who has dysfunction. But then there's the loss of love trigger. And this is the one that Eric, you're talking about, is we learn early on what we need to do to secure love, and what the danger is of losing love, and we'll fight and flee a lot to get back that love. So you'll see that sometimes, and you're discussing the trust issues. A lot of times, well, my wife and I, just to come clean and be transparent, okay, we do watch reality shows, okay, some reality shows like The
As do I. Yeah.
Bachelor, right, or whatever, and we tortured ourselves with one recently, which we're not going to do again, called Love Is Blind, okay,
Oh yeah.
all right,
That's a good
and,
one.
and there was one woman on that show who was totally swept up in that danger of the loss of love. And she would do torturing this guy, because anything he did, he would not trust her. I mean, she would not trust him. So she would fight and flee. So she was just too, it was driving him crazy. And I was joking around with my wife. I said that, she was at an event and the camera was on, and I saw her sitting with some guy. And so we've been married going on 35 years. And I would say, if I was that person, even after 35 years, I would say, what were you doing sitting next to that guy? What were you talking about? What was that? So it's the loss of love. So anyway, those are, I just wanted to kind of refresh my listeners as far as how this automatic brain, I talk about this primitive nature, this automatic nature, how it kind of has a grip on us, and how you're talking about, Eric, how you were trying to calm. And and again, fight or flight shows itself in anxiety, it shows itself in insecurity, it shows itself in all sorts of ways that just don't feel good. So you turn to drugs, and I kind of want to get a little granular too, and it's not that
Yeah.
pleasant, okay? But you said how you progressed from weed to alcohol to oxy to injectables, I can imagine heroin. Uh, uh, was that one of the injectable injections that you were
Yeah.
doing?
So
Oh, yeah,
I pretty much, progressed from, and I started doing drugs and alcohol very young. I'd say very young from today's standards. I
yeah.
think the first time I smoked weed was in sixth grade.
Wow. Okay.
Um, and what happened was, I smoked weed in sixth grade. When I get to high school, I tried all the normal things I think, kids are curious about, or at least at that time I was. I tried mushrooms in high school. I
Hmm.
tried LSD. I tried, MDMA. Um, I tried benzodiazepine, so I tried like a Xanax or a Klonopin, type, drug. And I found, opiates to be what I really was drove, what
Mm,
I really wanted the most. That
yeah.
that was the end game. I was like, wow, I found what I was looking for. And it's like an analogy for, like, I found that trust again,
Yeah. Wow.
and go back to what you just, asked me before. I, ever since the trust was broken between my parents, I was always looking for ways to build trust with people that would never be broken,
Wow.
because I saw trust that was broken so easily. So opiates did that for me. And I don't know how they did it, but they did that. They provided that false sense of trust. Um, And so it started with the pills. At the time, 2010, 2011, it was big to, snort the pills.
Yeah.
And then, people were smoking the pills off tinfoil, which is a whole nother thing. And then I had a lot of older friends, and one of them introduced me into a syringe, a needle.
Yeah.
And he said, if you just, do it this way, it's much quicker, it's much cleaner. You're not smoking anything, you're not snorting anything. And I, being very susceptible to any sort of older person, telling me that this is cool and this is what you should do, I said, okay, let's give it a shot. And,
Wow.
so we started, injecting the pills, mixing it with water, injecting the pills.
Yeah.
And then I was then introduced by the same older friend into that there's something called heroin, that is way less expensive than the pills. It's more easily accessible and it gets you much, higher to get you where you want to be much quicker. And so I said, wow, I'm in, where do I sign? And from there, I ran with it. That was the end game for me, and I
Wow.
did that for, until I got sober in 2015. A few breaks along the way when I went to treatment, but that was it.
Yeah. And, what the audience, my listeners may not understand is that uh, these medications, the opioids, they give you a sense of euphoria, and that sense of euphoria is, it makes you as though you're invincible, or you don't have anything. You have that, like Eric is saying, you have that trust. You can trust that this will give you that sense of peace. And it's such a lie. It's such a trap. And
Oh, it's
it's
such a
really,
trap. Yeah.
yeah, it's such a trap. It's like it's really the devil in the blue dress, the devil, it's really a devil. I mean, it just seduces you. It seduces you, and it destroys your body, where it latches on, and it makes your receptors, it makes them so there are more receptors. So you have more opioid receptors to now you have to fill up with this to get this euphoria, it and you chase it, and it's so devastating. And as you described, you look back and you said, if I don't do something, I'm gonna be dead. And certainly, look, we know and this is before fentanyl. Thank God you got out of it before that, because
Yeah.
fentanyl is 10 times stronger than heroin. So you get a more of a high, but it's 10 times deadlier. And we're losing, 70,000, 100,000 people of in a year of drug overdoses. And it is really important to know that these aren't people, even, these are people who are seeking an escape. They are fighting and fleeing whatever their life circumstance was. And all of us have our own story. And we all have our dangers, our threats, and our vulnerabilities and our insecurities. And if we don't know that we have a higher consciousness, if we don't know we have a higher mind to be able to take a step back and to say, well, this isn't real, this isn't true, this is fake, this is a fake, this is a seduction. There's this is a narcissist, really. The drug is like a
Yeah.
narcissist, and the way the narcissist works is with lies, with seduction and manipulation, seduction, and lies. So it's manipulative. It says, "Oh, you're going to feel well, if you don't do this, you're not going to be able to get over your social anxiety, Eric." And then it seduces you. And if you do take it, you're going to feel better than you've ever felt in your life. And yeah, the euphoria for a brief time is a euphoria, but then the lies come in, and the lie is that, oh, you need this to live, to really live a good life. You need this. And so, if you could tell us now, uh, okay, so you're going through, did you finish high school?
So I finished high school. I graduated, and I always did fairly well with my grades. So it's not, I could have went to college. I think I graduated with a 3.6. Um, but I ended up going to community college. And so what happened was when I graduated high school, um, I was deep into the throes of addiction. And addiction is a progressive disease. So the longer it goes untreated, the worse it gets. So imagine where I was when I first tried substances when I was in sixth grade.
Yeah.
And it just, the next 10 years of my life was just my addictions doing push-ups and it's just getting progressively worse. So when I graduated high school, I had no direction. I had no um, semblance on how to ask for help, how to, how to really do anything. So I ended up going to community college. I went there for a year. I ended up, boosting my GPA even a little bit higher, and I got into UConn. I was able to make it to UConn, at UConn for maybe one full semester and then three-quarters of the next semester, and then
Mm,
I had to drop out. I couldn't withstand, that type of environment and, my addiction at the same time. Um,
yeah.
and so it was very tough for me to progress in life with this addiction progressing simultaneously. It presented a lot of problems. Yeah.
In college, did you have access to the drugs the same way?
So in college, you're around drugs and alcohol as it is. I tried to join a fraternity and I would have made it in, but I was going home every weekend to get drugs and alcohol, to get
Mm,
drugs, opiates, and bring them back to school. And, growing up in Greenwich to Yukon, in Storrs, Connecticut, that's quite a far drive.
yes. Yeah.
Um, so I would take the bus home every weekend, and then I would have my friends drive me back up every Sunday. And so that was not sustainable. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So when it's now gotten to the point, it sounds like where you were chasing the euphoria, the feeling of the fighting and fleeing back out of the social anxiety, fitting in and all this. And now it sounds like the danger has become different. The danger now is going into withdrawal or chasing that feeling where you need more and more. Could you tell us kind of how that vicious cycle starts, kind of how you start spiraling in that cycle?
Sure. So it starts as, you're trying to get away from the social anxiety, you're trying to feel good. And what opiates were doing for me was it was like somebody was wrapping a very warm blanket around my back. And
Wow.
I felt like I was Superman. Um, so you have the euphoric, feeling, you have the euphoric thoughts, the euphoric outlook on life. You feel like somebody's wrapped a warm blanket around you, and then you feel like you could do anything that you could possibly imagine. And so it goes from that to then the physical withdrawal starts to, pick up and the physical dependency starts to pick up. And it's not so much that you're chasing those feelings of euphoria, comfort, and warmth. You're chasing the feeling that you don't want to be sick. You don't want to
Right.
go through withdrawal. And so that's really when your addiction, starts to spiral out of control because you are willing to do anything and everything to not feel withdrawal and to not be sick and to chase, that drug because that's the only thing that makes you feel okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the classic deal with the devil. I mean,
It's such a trade-off and you lose
yeah,
every time, but you can't see that at the time. You cannot
right.
see
Of
that
course.
it's a game that you'll never win.
Yeah. Are you comfortable saying the center that you went to when you became
Of
sober?
course.
Yeah.
So I went to, and I'm thinking I went to I went to four places for treatment.
Hmm.
But three times I went to the same place. So I went to Sunrise Detox in New Jersey. But in the first time I went to treatment, I went to Mountainside Treatment Center in 2013.
Hmm.
Then I went to Mountainside again in 2014 and 2015. And I had a small stint at Sunrise Detox in 2014.
Okay.
But those are my only treatment experiences at Mountainside.
Yeah.
And it was a
And,
wonderful treatment experience.
Yeah, and the treatment centers, and I don't discourage people from doing that. It's afterwards, and as you mentioned, it's in some ways it's kind of like when I started writing my the way I started writing my book. It started with weekly emails, and that weekly email started with one patient came into my office and said to me that he felt so great talking with me, invigorated, but then he'd go back into his life and things would fall apart. And he didn't have the tools to prevent them. When he said fall apart, it meant physically, it meant him eating poorly or doing things that weren't good for his health. Not drugs, but just poor lifestyle choices. So he asked me, was there something I could do to give him tools? And we came up with this idea of a weekly email, weekly support in a way, which kind of grew into a lot more of my writing. And tell us what it was like for you afterwards. So May 9th, 2015, you said?
May 19th, 2015. Yeah.
May 19th, 2015. So tell us how that, how you were able to stick it that time, how you were able to make it work without falling back that time.
So, I entered in treatment in May of 2015. And I had it in my mind that I was willing to do whatever it took to get out of that life. I wanted a new lease on life. I was 22, turning 23. I said, I have so much more life to live. Whatever it takes, I'm willing to do. Um, I really dove headfirst into any suggestion that was given to me by the treatment center, by the professionals that knew more than me. I said, I'm hands off on this. I don't know what's best for me right now. I need people to assess me and tell me what's going to give me the best chance of never returning to this life. Um, so, I completed 30 days of treatment. I then was suggested to go to a sober living environment where I would stay, you know, find a job, work,
Mm.
be around my peers, that were going through the same struggles as me, and, stay in a treatment setting, stay in a safe, sober environment. So I did that. I
What
went
it,
to a sober, yeah,
so what is that? Yeah, just explain. Like, is that a
of course.
house? Is it a commune? What is it?
Of course.
Yeah, yeah.
So a sober living environment, there's a few different types. There's, sober living, which is a house with other sober individuals, usually coming from treatment. There's a house manager, that usually lives there, who's, been in recovery for a long years,
Hmm.
usually. Um, and you do things like, check in every day in the morning, and you all get a sober, safe job, and you do weekly activities and events, and you stay with your cohort of sober individuals. You abstain from drugs and alcohol. You're drug tested and breathalyzed, randomly during the week. So it's really a safe environment.
Mm, that's great. Yeah. So that's the support, right? I mean, you unleash somebody after they feel good, after they've, we're in the psychiatrist, psychologist's office, my office, or a treatment center, and then you unleash them without any support. And it can fall, things
The
can fall
wheels can
apart.
come right off. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How long
What
were
what
you
I
in that?
find,
Go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
Now, I was just going to say how long you were in that safe house or
Of course.
yeah,
So,
sober house.
what I find, now, and what I did then was I was in the sober living for 5 months additionally. So when I'm getting out of treatment, I have 30 days, I have 1 month, and then I stayed for an additional 5 months in a sober
Mm,
environment. So I had about 6 months when I was living on my own, but I was living with two roommates from that sober living environment. Um, but so the best thing that you can do after a treatment setting is one, take what you learned in treatment and apply it to real life within a safe, supportive environment. And that's what a sober living does for you. It gives you that chance to have that real world application.
mm. Yeah,
Um,
that's
yeah.
great. Yeah. So now, you're 23 years old and you leave the sober house environment. What happens next? What will you, okay, so the reason why I say what happens next is that we know that you had things in your life that you were having challenges with, that your brain was making you fight and flee into these very unhealthy choices and very deadly choices.
Sure.
So, was there something that you turned to that was healthier that might have been able to, what we say, sublimate that anxiety? So, for instance, I had anxiety. I've had anxiety, and I found that when I was in medical school, instead of doing drugs, I started doing karate. Okay. That was my, that was kind of that's how I sublimated
Amazing.
the fight or flight. So we get anxiety, that fight or flight is going, the anxiety, dangers, insecurities. I had a lot of them. I would turn to that. And then I'd later turn, yeah, I would do that. And then I would start running. And that was helpful. Now in my older years, I exercise a lot. So what are some of the ways, because so many people, the reason how they get into drugs is they're fighting and fleeing danger, threats, or vulnerabilities, and they don't have, they're obviously counterproductive choices that they're making, but in some ways they are trying to calm that down because the physical feeling is so uncomfortable. So what do you do? Because obviously, look, I'm in my 60s now. I still have anxieties and insecurities, but I I sublimate that into something that's that has a better outcome. So now you left the sober house, that you're in 23. What came next? What did you do to stay sober?
Great question. And it was a combination of things.
Yeah.
I moved into an apartment or a house with two of my roommates from the sober living, so I'm still living with sober guys. I continued working with a therapist and a psychiatrist, to really continuously work on that anxiety,
Mm.
all the underlying issues that I had, the feelings. And I picked up, well, before I get into that, I tried a bunch of different things. I tried to throw myself into work. I worked in restaurants, so I worked a ton. I thought that would, kind of ease or give me some sort of focus. I went back to school, taking, a few classes at a time to try to finish my degree. But what I really found that was helpful was I had to believe in a higher power for myself, and I had to find some activity that was going to give me focus, that was going to give me drive, that was going to give me some motivation. And so I
Mm.
found running as, a way to combat all those things. Um, Running really changed my life. It was something I was, good at. I ran in high school. I had ran on the cross country team. And so I said, why don't I pick it back up again? And I ran with it. Now I've run 6 marathons and I've raised, over, 20,000 for, substance use and addiction for people seeking scholarships for treatment.
Mm.
Um, Really it gave me a sense of purpose. It gave me the motivation, it helped me find my drive again. Um, but I'd say finding that activity, believing in something larger than myself in this world that we live in, and then the combination of, keeping connected to my network of safe and sober guys and, therapy and any sort of extra, support you can give yourself.
Yeah. Wow, that's so powerful. Um, it's and I love it because what you're talking about, especially with the running, you're getting a natural high, a physical, the endorphins that are being released is giving you a euphoria. And that's something that obviously is good for your physical body. But one very important thing that is kind of key and why Alcoholics Anonymous has worked so well for so long, and in fact, in my practice, the only thing that worked with alcoholics in my practice, the only thing in my over 30 years of medical practice, the only thing that ever got people sober is going to AA. And one of the foundations of AA is believing in a higher power. Now, AA is not a religious organization, but it is believing in a higher power. So the higher power I believe in happens to be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's for me. Okay. For some other people, it may not be that, and it may be some other something that they can't describe, but they put their full trust, the true trust and faith in that. And it's important to understand because the physical is, as we talk about with the automatic brain, is so convincing, right? I mean, it feels terrible when we get nervous, our stomachs, or we feel shaky. It feels awful. And we look for anything in this real world, in this physical world of our senses, to calm that down. When in reality, we're much more than our five senses. Because I always use this example: the table that's here in front of me, I can smash it, and it's very convincing that it's solid, but in reality, it's 99.9% empty space, because the
Mm.
distance between the center, the nucleus, and an electron, which are the atoms that make up this table, the distance between the electrons and and nucleus of that atom is like the putting being in the nosebleed section of a stadium and having a little dot of sand in the middle, and all that empty space. Multiply that by 1 trillion times, and you're going to get the makeup of that desk, and it's mostly empty space. So the physical is very convincing, but when we put our faith and trust in our divine nature rather than our automatic primitive animalistic brain, which only works in the realm of the natural world, when we put our faith in that, as you're describing, Eric, it seems to me that and and being productive in the physical world. So, don't get me wrong. When I talk about this stuff, a lot of people think it's woo woo, and they think, oh, you sit on the couch and you just say, oh God, give me this, whatever. No, it's not that.
Sure, sure.
You, taking action like you did, getting a purpose, waking up with a purpose, having a physical exercise that actually increases your feeling of euphoria rather than turning to something else, and then trusting and having faith in that divine entity. It sounds like that was the winning ticket for you. It sounds like.
It sure was. I like to say that running saved my life. And finding running saved my life because it gave me such a purpose. It gave me such something to look forward to. It really was a huge changer for me. The
Yeah.
other piece that was, helped me save my own life was, believing in that there is something larger out there than myself. Because if I think I'm the biggest thing here
Uh-huh.
and I control everything in the universe and things are the way they happen because I say that's how, you're not gonna you need to believe in something larger than yourself. And whether that's karma, whether that's the universe working mysterious ways, or whether that's, God, or whether that's any other sort of God in any religion, finding that higher power will help you have a guiding light.
Absolutely. And that guiding light is, and also, a lot of people challenge me because I share my faith and my belief and in that higher power, and they'll say, oh, there's no proof, this or that. Well, there's actually tens of thousands of people who have had near-death experiences that see that shining light. And that shining light is the beacon and is really a guiding light. And so I would encourage people, if you have doubts in this and you can't do what, Eric is describing or I'm describing, I'd listen to some of those near-death experiences, and they're not all, as Neil deGrasse Tyson said, happening on an operating table. And when I heard him say that, it really turned my stomach because he was in an interview, and someone asked him about what do you think near-death experiences are, and he says, "Well, why do you think they always see a bright light? Because they always happen on an operating table where there's a surgical light above," which is so wrong. Most of them don't happen that way. So it really, that really helped me, because I was kind of not believing myself when I would tell patients, for instance, that uh, when one of their family members is dying, oh, they're going to be okay. They're going to a better place. And like me, it's hard for me not to be truthful. And so I did research on it and research and research, and I really became convinced, yes, there is truly an afterlife, and yes, there is truly a divine power, and there is something greater than ourselves. So, kind of backing up, when we're talking about the drugs, how drugs are like a narcissist, right? And they're like the devil, which is narcissism. And I define the devil as the automatic brain because it has all the characteristics of it. It pretends, it manipulates you to think that if you do these things, that you're really going to be safe, and that it seduces you by thinking if you only do these things, it's going to be safer than you've ever wanted before. But then it will lie to you and it will say that you'll live forever with this and you don't need anything else but these drugs, or you don't need anything else but the getting, the fear. So you don't need anything but fear. Um, so you know, Eric, I didn't say this, but I want to tell the my listeners that I had, if you go back and look at my podcast, I interviewed Stu, who shared his journey. Well, Eric is going to be Stu's son-in-law, okay? And Eric is marrying Stu's daughter, who I've known ever since she was born, and I can't imagine anyone who I'd rather have as a surrogate son-in-law, because or nephew, because Stu and I are like brothers, than you, Eric, because you're just an inspiration to us. So tell us about a little bit about the work that you're doing now, when you talk about the passion that you have, and
Of course.
what's the work that you're doing now?
And Charlie, I want to say thank you for those kind words. I
Oh,
again, I couldn't imagine you're the perfect surrogate uncle, or someone like that.
thank you.
Um, the work that I'm doing now, so I work for a company called Release Recovery, and so we specialize in transitional living, which is that sober living that I explained, but really gave me that, leg up on the competition. So we have, 5 houses total across New York City and
Wow.
Westchester. We just opened a clinical office in Purchase, New York, where we do therapy and medication management and case management services. We also do a slew of concierge behavioral health services like intervention services, case management, sober companioning, sober coaching. So a lot of different, avenues to what we do. The other side of, the business is called the Release Recovery Foundation, which is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit where we raise money for, individuals seeking help that wouldn't have access to it otherwise. And so we've raised now just about $4 million for scholarships for individuals seeking, treatment. And that can be treatment from a residential stay for addiction, residential stay for mental health diagnosis, therapy, psychiatry, any sort of doctor appointment. It's really for anyone that's seeking help. And so the primary way that we raise that money is through running the New York City Marathon and running marathons.
Mm.
We provide bibs, so the number on your chest, if somebody raises a specific amount of money. So $5,000 will get you a bib. And so I think our application just opened this year for the New York City Marathon, and we had over 300 applicants.
Wow.
A lot
Nice.
of people are coming out to raise money for us. I've run the New York City Marathon 4 times. I've run the Berlin Marathon. I've run the Philadelphia Marathon, and I've run a few of them for the Release Recovery Foundation. And it just brings me such joy to run for, such a great cause, to help somebody that was in my position who needed access to treatment. Um, and good treatment is not accessible to everyone,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
There are there are people that can't afford really good quality treatment, and that's really what gives you the leg up. that gives you the ability to change everything about your life and,
Yeah.
go forward.
Yeah. Well, I ran two New York marathons, and it wasn't because it was kind of a selfish reason. Okay. The first, this was way back when I was your age, probably. Um, the first time it was because I was looking at other people who were running it, and I was saying to myself, man, if they could do it, I could do this. All right. So that was the first. And the second reason I ran it the next year is because I didn't want to be at a cocktail party when I was my age saying that I only ran one New York Marathon. I had to say that I ran it twice. So those are kind of the selfish reasons. If I was still running, I
Those
would
are great
love,
reasons to me.
right. Um, you mentioned about an intervention. That's some of the work. Oh, actually, let me just back up for a second. D- the people who you work with, are they all recovering addicts, or would you say the most?
So the majority, great question. The majority of the people that we work with are recovering from substance use,
Yeah.
but some of them are recovering from primary mental health diagnosis
Mm,
or even eating disorder.
mm,
It's really behavioral health as an umbrella, and we
yep.
work with anyone under that. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. And now, are you still working with Zach, or is that a different company?
No, still working with Zach Clark, our
Okay,
founder and CEO,
right,
our fearless leader. Yeah.
right. Okay, so I had mentioned that my wife and I, of course, guilty pleasure. We don't do it as much anymore. I won't, so don't think poorly of me, but the reality show. So Zach Clark was one of the bachelors, or actually, well, he was
He
picked.
was
He
he
was
was on The Bachelorette in 2020 and he
right,
won.
right,
And
right. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
it was an amazing season.
Yeah, yeah. So, but anyway, that said, a little plug for that. But talk a little bit about the intervention part. Like, what does that look like? Like, how are you involved, and are you involved in that part, that piece?
Sure, of course. So an intervention is, essentially a family meeting. So we provide the intervention services where we will, meet with a family. We will do some planning around what the intervention will look like, where that person is in their, addiction journey, if an intervention is needed. And then we'll come together as a family for, centered around love and support and engage with that person and try to get them to accept the help that's being offered. And so I'm involved with the interventions that we do at Release. We don't do as much as we'd like to do now since we opened the clinical office in Purchase, but it's still a big part of what we do, and it's saving lives, But it's a very tough process.
Yes,
It's can be
yes,
emotionally draining for the family.
yeah,
It's takes a lot of boundaries for the family to put up to have their loved one accept the help or for them to say, well, we can't be in your life if that's the case, if you're not going to accept this help. And it really tests the families, that we work with.
yeah. So, what I'd like you to do at toward the end of this podcast, I'd like you to give some words of wisdom, if you will, to what can parents do, if anything. Okay, because I don't know that they can do anything, but what parents can do if they have a child who is uh, having substance abuse, and then after that, if somebody is listening to this podcast who is in the throes of substance abuse like you were, what would you say would be their first step? And just going to start with the parents, maybe.
Sure. So my biggest advice for parents and what I see the most in my work now is, don't be afraid to do your own work and do your own education. The best thing that you can do if you have a loved one that's struggling with substance use or addiction, is get educated about it. Learn about the services that can help. Learn about what, your loved one is going through, your child or your brother or your mother is going through. Because that's your biggest leg up on the competition, knowing what you're dealing with, and reaching out for help.
Mm,
Uh, the biggest thing that people don't do is reach out for help. They think they can handle it on their own. They can take care of this internally. And That's usually never the case. So, and you know, I would say anybody can reach out to me and ask any questions, and you know, I'm happy to give anyone guidance and be that source of learning or education. But don't be afraid to do your own work, do your education, and ask for help.
Yeah,
I
that's
think um, for somebody struggling, it's you know, it's along the same lines. You know, reach out for help, ask for help. You know, because that's the biggest thing that's going to keep you sick. Um, and again, somebody can reach out to me directly. I'd love to speak to somebody struggling and give them some guidance and give them some help.
Yeah, I'll leave all that contact information in the description on the in the podcast. Yeah, I think this is so great information, Eric, and thank you so much for sharing your very deep personal journey. And I know that people can. There are certainly many people out there who could, uh, unfortunately, relate to it, and especially in this day and age where especially with fentanyl and uh, so many
Yeah,
other drugs, illicit drugs that are out there, and again, helping people understand that it's a deal with the devil. I mean, it's really
there is.
it's view the drug as the most narcissistic person that you ever knew. And so you don't trust that drug to give you good advice. So it's gonna manipulate you, it's gonna seduce you, it's gonna lie to you. And reach out to Eric and his company. So really, thank you so much, Eric, and thank you, listeners, for joining me on the Coach MD podcast. Until next time, I'm your host, Dr. Charles, aka Coach MD, urging you to stay strong in mind. Okay, that's not brain, but in mind. That's your higher mind, in body, and right here in soul. Bye for now.